Welcome back to She Reaches, the podcast from SSPI Wise, where we spotlight the incredible women shaping the future of the space industry. SSPI Wise is a global initiative of space and satellite professionals, aiming to elevate those who identify as women within the industry. Begun in 2020, SSPI Wise has held numerous networking events and workshops, created mentorship and visibility opportunities through mentoring and social media working groups, and generally giving voice to the aspiration of women, space and satellite professionals around the world. I'm your host, Tanveer Pujara, and today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Laura Crabtree, CEO and founder of Epsilon3. Epsilon3 is the first spacecraft operating system designed to handle intricate workflows and improve mission management. Launched in 2021, Epsilon3 was born from Laura's experience with Excel sheets, checklists, and disparate tools that couldn't keep pace with complex missions. Laura is noted for being one of the crew operations and resource engineers on SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft and was also on console for the first Dragon mission in 2010, the first mission to the International Space Station in 2012, and part of the commercial crew contract over the next decade, including the mission that delivered astronauts to the ISS in 2020. Laura has a bachelor's in astronautical engineering and a master's in systems architecture, both from the University of Southern California. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk to you today.
Great to have you. How is it? How is it over there in sunny California today?
It's not sunny today. It's actually June gloom today. So we're waiting for July weather, which is going to be sunny.
Oh, no. So actually London is doing better than California then because the sun is shining here.
Probably you're better off today and you have longer days.
Yes, we do. We do. So let's get right into it then. I just want to first ask you, what drew you into the space industry and what inspired you to do an astronautical engineering degree?
Well, from an early age, I used to watch all of the shuttle launches. So I have many memories of sitting in front of an old school television, not the ones that we know today, the one with the very long back and, tube television. The shuttle launches, whenever I could watch them, I watched them with my parents. And so I had a fascination with space very early on. And I used to look up to the sky and wonder what it would be like. And when I was picking a major in high school, my counselor, my college counselor would tell me, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to do something in space. And this was a while ago. There were no degrees in space, really. And so the closest thing I got was aero-astro. And it was an aerospace degree, so focused a lot on aircraft, but with an astronautical focus. And now there are numerous degrees about space, but this was more than 20 years ago. And so it was that or chemical engineering, because I've always really liked fire and rocketry. But I felt like the pull for space and space dynamics was a little bit stronger in me. And I also knew that it would be really hard. And I wanted to challenge myself to do something as hard as possible. So that's really why I went into astronautics.
But was there a particular moment in your career or in your journey to get into the space industry? Was there a particular moment or a role model that you had that, sort of pushed you in that direction?
Well, it's funny you ask. I didn't have a role model that I looked up to necessarily, but the reason that I wanted to go into engineering is actually a really interesting sort of side story, because sometimes there are these moments in life that, and people that come into your life that change the course of your life in ways that you don't even know. And I don't even know this person anymore. But I was flying to Texas when I was in high school. And this is back, when I knew I wanted to work in the space industry. I knew I wanted to do something in space, but nobody ever told me what engineering was. And I sat next to a person on an airplane, flying to go visit one of my friends in Texas who was a chemical engineer. And he taught me about engineering. And I was only a sophomore. And it was a very pivotal moment for me, because then I started researching what engineering was actually, because I grew up in a family of doctors, nurses, and lawyers. There are no engineers in my family other than me. And that was really a huge moment in my life and a turning point. And it's interesting that was just a couple hours I sat next to someone on a plane, and I think he changed the course of my life.
Wow. It's amazing when you meet those people and they stick with you forever,
Yeah.
right? You'll always remember that. It's incredible.
I will. And, I am one of those people who sits on an airplane and talks to random people, and I still do it to this day. And you will find that there aren't that many people that do it anymore. But I find that there are so many interesting people out there in the world, and I want to get to know as many of them as possible. And so sitting next to a random person, you will often find me chatting it up for the entire flight. There are days when I don't, and I want to read a book or watch something on my tablet, but most days I would like to talk to random people.
Amazing. I'd love to sit next to you on a plane.
Yeah, it's pretty fun, actually. I used to have this game with other people in the space industry and astronauts that I would train. And I asked them, they sit on planes, they travel coach. I've sat next to many of them on a Southwest flight. And if you didn't know they were astronauts, you wouldn't know until they told you, or you asked them a lot of questions. So hence asking people a lot of questions. Wow. And I used to have this game with them. How many questions do people have to ask you? What do you do? Until you tell them, I'm an astronaut and I go to space for a living. Some astronauts, you'd be interested to know that some astronauts, it's one question. And others, it's like 8 or 9. Sometimes they just want to be normal. But anyway, I find that to be very interesting. You never know who you're sitting next to.
That is very interesting. And I think it varies with country to country as well. Like in different areas, like when you go to London, the first question people ask is, what do you do? You go elsewhere, that's not the first question people ask. So that's quite interesting. Okay, great. So you went to university, you did an engineering degree, and then you worked for 2 incredibly well-known, huge companies, Northrop Grumman and SpaceX. How did those early experiences shape what you're doing today?
Oh, man. I pull from those experiences every day. People often ask, when you go into the working world, do you ever use the things that you learned in college? And I think everything that you do and everything that you learn shapes how you guide the next portion of your life. And so I might not be doing calculations on orbital dynamics anymore, but that shaped how I think about what our customers now have to do. So when I think about my experience at Northrop Grumman, it taught me a lot about government contracting, about how large companies work, how large companies think, how different large or small programs within a large company works. And I utilize that knowledge and what types of things would motivate them to make changes on a daily basis now. I also learned a lot about spacecraft operations at Northrop Grumman, and I basically wanted to take that knowledge and start from scratch, which is why I ended up at SpaceX. I started at SpaceX early days when Dragon had not launched yet, when Falcon 9 hadn't launched yet. And my goal was to take what I knew from an operational mission that I was working at Northrop Grumman and really apply that to what if I had to start anew? And what if I didn't have all of the documentation, all of the training written out for me as like a well-oiled machine? And that's what I did there, was start with, okay, here's an empty desk. What do you want your operations to look like? What do you want people to do? How do you want people to interface with the vehicle, et cetera? And so I pulled from that experience at SpaceX. And then now looking at how do companies build? What makes them move faster? What makes them need to hire people? And I apply everything I learned before as to, one, how I want to build the company and the company culture, as well as what do our customers want and need and what helps them move faster, which is really the crux of why we exist. So I think everything everything is kind of feeding into the next steps. Yes.
Yeah. So it set you up essentially to do what you're doing today. That's
Absolutely.
great. But was it quite difficult, getting into those companies, starting, I guess, how soon after university did you start at Northrop Grumman? And then how did you get into SpaceX?
Yeah. Also great stories. So when I was at university, this is a while ago, so I will just temper this answer because back then internships didn't exist. They had job fairs, and they still have job fairs. And I went to a job fair and I handed out my resume and I said, I'd like to work at this company. I had multiple interviews and I took the first interview, which was down the street. So I was at USC. Northrop Grumman was down the street over in the South Bay in Redondo Beach, which is where I still live. And I took that interview and they offered me a job and I canceled all the other interviews. And I said, this is where I want to be. I think looking back, one of the things that I tell people when they start their career is when you accept a job offer, the first thing you should think about is negotiating. And nobody ever told me that the only time you get to negotiate anything is when you first start a job. And
100%.
that's one thing that I regretted. But even still, the experience at Northrop Grumman was amazing because it also, after a year and a half there, I moved to Northern England to work on an RAF base. And so I was still working at Northrop Grumman and living in another country, which really helped open up my mind to other people, other cultures, because I also did a lot of traveling while I was there. And, I grew up in Southern California. I went to school in Southern California. And then all of a sudden, I am finding myself living in another country and having to learn other cultures, how other people live. And I think that was a really another pivotal decision that I made for myself, but that really helped shape the course of the rest of my life thus far.
And how long were you at Northrop for?
I was at Northrop for just over 5 years.
Okay, wow.
So not actually that long.
And then you worked at the RAF, you mentioned to me?
I worked on an RAF base in England, yeah.
And what were you doing over there? Was it working on the spacecraft?
It was working on systems supporting the RAF and supporting the US. So a lot of different systems that I worked on over there.
Okay, interesting.
And then I had a friend who had started at SpaceX early on, and he had tried to recruit me numerous times over the years. But I said, I'm really happy at Northrop and they treat me really well. And I really like what I'm doing here. But then when my time in England was coming to a close, I reached out to him and I said, hey, I think I'm ready to interview. And he set me up with the person that he basically forwarded my resume. And the person that ended up hiring me said, yes, I'd love to talk to you. And funny enough, he called me on the 4th of July. So it would have been the 4th of July here, and it was the evening for me. But obviously the British people don't celebrate the 4th of July. But in the US, I said, hey, aren't you, out celebrating? It's the 4th of July. He said, no, I work all the time. And I said, okay, that's fine with me. It doesn't matter. And I guess if I was put off by that, then I probably wasn't the right person for the job.
Yeah.
But being 8 hours ahead, it was late at night for me and early morning for him. Well, not early morning, but and that was the first indication that I was going to have to work really hard at SpaceX if I really wanted to make a difference. And I think that was true for the 11 years that I was there.
Yeah, I was going to say you did a long stint with SpaceX.
I did.
Amazing. And you did some incredible things. As I mentioned in your bio, you were on the console for the first Dragon mission to the ISS. And you've helped train astronauts as well, which is incredible. How was that? How was the process of doing something so, such on a massive scale like that?
I think we didn't really realize the impact that we were having in the moment. And it's only now looking back that we can really appreciate what we did. We knew that we wanted to be the first. We knew that we wanted to get there before anyone else, in this case, Boeing. and in the previous case, Orbital, which was purchased by Northrop Grumman. And I think for us, we just knew that we needed to keep our heads down and work really hard to get there. And we saw competition at our heels. And then now looking back, we had a huge impact on the industry itself, and I think continue to do so. But in that moment, it was just, what's the next milestone? How hard do I have to work to get there? And what sacrifices do I have to make? Because in order to make big changes in the world, you do have to make sacrifices, both in your life, in your family's life, and for the good of humanity or for the good of the industry. I think we all did that and continue to do so.
I can imagine it must have been a lot of long hours, a lot of stress. And like you said, in that moment, you don't actually realize that you're making history, do you? You're just trying to get the job done.
Yeah. We when I got married while I was at SpaceX and had both of my sons while I was there. And I think for me, the changes were, I have to decide when I'm going to leave, but continue to work after my kids go to bed. And so that was my norm. Was before I got married and had kids, I would work long hours at SpaceX and then on site. And then after, I spent a lot of time working from home, waking up early, working before my kids woke up. And those were the kinds of sacrifices that nobody asks you to make, but you make because you believe really strongly in the mission and you want to get to the next steps.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a hustle, and you've definitely done it. And it's taken you to where you are today, which is incredible. How did it feel to get the personal call from the astronaut, Doug Hurley?
Yeah.
That was incredible. When I read that, I was like, wow.
It was interesting. It's, you get a phone call and it says, it's kind of like a collect call. It's like, you have a phone call and you're answering, and I don't normally answer random numbers, but Doug had given me a heads up and he says, if you get a random phone call that says from Houston, you need to answer. And I had an inkling that he was going to call me, but I'm just walking the dog and walking with my 2 kids in a stroller who are fighting and with my husband. And I answered the phone and I looked at my husband and I was like, you need to go keep walking. I'm going to just stay back here. And we chatted and he said, how's Redondo Beach? And I was actually on my way to the beach at that moment. So it was quite a surreal thing. I'm thinking, you're floating in space. This is pretty cool.
Was there a lag or what was the experience?
No.
Did you hear him?
I could hear him perfectly fine, as if he were, in the house next door.
Wow.
The technology nowadays is very, very good. And, the future space stations will likely have Starlink connectivity. And so you'll be able to call whomever you want, whenever you want. But on the space station right now, it is more gate kept and it's more voice over IP. Do you remember like the phones that would call through your computer? Mm-hmm. It's not exactly like that, but kind of like that.
Yeah. So did you know Doug quite well, or do you know him personally now? Or
I do, yeah. So I do know him really well. I did train him. He was he and Bob were my crew, and I was responsible for all of their training. I was their lead trainer for the first mission, and basically got them from here's the design of Dragon to flight. And at that moment, when we first met them, there were 4 astronauts. There was actually, Sunny, Eric, Doug, and Bob. So there were 4. And then 2 of the crew members got assigned to Boeing and 2 got assigned to SpaceX. Mm-hmm. And from then on out, it was just Doug and Bob who came out. But prior to that, we had all 4 of them coming out very regularly to train with us and learn more about Dragon.
And what was the process like designing training for somewhere that you'd not been to yourself?
There, we actually had a person on site that had done a lot of the early ISS training.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled a lot of knowledge and experience from her as I was designing it. I did a lot of research and a lot of speaking with people who had designed ISS training previously. It's just that I couldn't call up the Soyuz training team and say, what do you do for training your astronauts on Soyuz? So it was completely new, because the International Space Station training is obviously a lot more in depth, because you're going to spend potentially 6 months, more than likely, up there. And it's a lot more maintenance, a lot more repeating operations, emergency operations, and crew. How does the crew work together? With Dragon, it's a 1 or 2 day trip. So it's, what are the things that you can affect in the vehicle? How does the vehicle work? What are the things you have to be able to do? And so it's a lot of putting on your suit, taking off your suit, saving yourself in the event of depressurization or fire event, and then a lot of launch and landing operations. So there was different but similar. And so it's more on what is Dragon going to do and how do you react to it than how do you live in space, because NASA covers a lot of the how do you live in space.
You are listening to an SSPI Wise podcast, She Reaches Women in Space. SSPI Wise meets on the fourth Thursday of each month via Zoom, with virtual networking and engagement opportunities and helpful career-building advice, especially, but not exclusively, for those of us who identify as women in space and satellite. For more information about SSPI Wise and to get involved, visit wise.sspI.org. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by JSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. In September and November, join SSPI and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world. The Roundtable is a real New York event you cannot miss. You can now register for our next New York Space Business Roundtable, which will be on September 30th. Call or raise Europe Bets on Sovereign Space. To register for this upcoming roundtable, visit sspI.org/events. And now back to She Reaches Women in Space.
So your main expertise was knowing exactly how Dragon worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And we did a lot of design feedback with the astronauts through the process, because if you go back to when the program of Dragon was started, we didn't have the entire vehicle designed and built, and then we trained them. We were continuing to design and iterate on the designs, building, especially with respect to the software, while we were training the crew. And so we would train them on something, and then as we would train them, they would ask questions and give us feedback, and then we would iterate on the design so that the next time there might be slightly different training. And I think that iterative process helped make Dragon what it is today as such a pivotal workforce in getting astronauts to the space station.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like it's all that hard work, has helped to what it is today. So you spent 11 years at SpaceX, and then you decided to leave and you decided to do something yourself. What was the gap that you were trying to fill? And talk me through your new company, Epsilon3.
Yeah. So, when I left SpaceX in 2020, a lot of people were changing their lives at that time. I think I wanted to continue changing something in the industry. I wanted to continue having a massive impact. And I think the thing that I kept going back on as I was interviewing with companies or talking to other companies was, if I go to one of these companies, I don't make an impact for everyone. I make an impact for one company. And a lot of the companies that I was speaking to had similar things that they wanted out of new age software. And I had some experience guiding software teams to building applications. And I wanted to see how that could apply in this case. And I started asking people, if I built this software, would you use it? What are the problems that you have? And could this potentially solve those problems? And a lot of people ended up saying yes. And so through the course of the first 6 months after I left, I decided gained the confidence to go and start Epsilon3. So the problem that Epsilon3 solves is, if you watch any launch or any operation, whether it's, spacecraft launch operations, space station, at legacy companies, you will see a lot of paper. You will see a lot of binders. You will see a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and people will be sending a lot of emails and Slack messages to one another about what's going on their vehicles. And we wanted to remove all of that paper that is untraceable and has potential to get lost, and you have the potential to make errors, and remove all of that and replace it with an application that helps guide all of the operations that people will do. And so we started with, what's the biggest problem? And the biggest problem was people's operational procedures and decision making. And so we started with that, and we have slowly expanded into testing and build, because what people wanted to do in Epsilon3 was have the full traceability of the life cycle of their parts, whether they're used for a build, whether they're used for testing, and then eventually used in operations. And so we have built out their inventory library, their traceability of builds and tests and operations, as well as, I know this is a lot, but as well as tracking when you have problems with any operation, if you had a fault on some piece of your vehicle, whether you on the ground need to replace hardware, or when you're in space, whether you need to go and do some troubleshooting. So you have all of the things that you would need in any part of that life cycle within one platform, so that it's not either paper-based or completely disjointed, multiple different applications for one final operation. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was a very long explanation.
No, so essentially making mission management, as we said, easier for companies to do from start to finish.
Yes.
And how did you go about setting up the company? Did you have co-founders, or was it just yourself?
I did. I had two co-founders. I have one remaining at the company. And he and I have been working together for the last 5 years almost, because he and I met at the end of 2020, many months before we officially founded Epsilon3.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And who were your first sort of calls? What areas did you focus most on first to build the company up?
That's a great question. So I reached out to people that I knew, and then asked if they would introduce me to other people that might be interested in talking. And it sort of worked out that all of our first users were not people that I had worked with previously, because that's a question that I get asked a lot. Did you just sell to your friends? And the answer is no. Sometimes selling to your friends is easy, and sometimes selling to your friends is hard. But for me, the first calls were to my friends, but the first people that I actually started working with were not my friends. And I think that's a testament to the problem that we were solving being a real one rather than a fake one, because the people that did not know me liked what we were doing.
And needed your product.
Yes.
Yeah. But obviously all of this was happening in COVID. So how challenging was that during the whole lockdown thing?
Really hard.
Yeah.
It was, for me, the most difficult thing was what to do with my children, because I have never had a nanny. Not only did I not want one really, but I couldn't, I don't have a lot of, empty cash to burn, and they're really expensive. And so I had my kids in school or in daycare, and during COVID, a lot of that was closed. And so I had to get really creative with the time that I was working and the time that I was with my kids, because if you try to work with small children, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
So I had to plan out the days with my husband. Here's the time you're working. Here's the time I'm working. You need to leave me alone. I will leave you alone. This is when you're in charge of the kids, because otherwise you're both going to be driving yourselves crazy trying to do too much at one time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty hard, setting everything up and doing it when the schools were mostly closed. But after that, it got easier when schools opened again.
Yeah. Great. Wow. So you juggled a lot in that time, created a business, which is almost 5 years old. Who would you say are your main customers for your product now? Who have you sold to?
We sell to many of the major companies that are out there. And then we work with spacecraft customers as well. And then we have about 100 plus companies around the aerospace businesses. So, both space, aviation, also automotive and renewables, fusion, nuclear. There's a lot of different types of companies that we support.
Okay. And in terms of when you started this, you said there was a gap in the market. In the last 4 to 5 years, have you seen any competitors for your product pop up?
Not necessarily for the first product that we offer, but there are definitely a lot of other companies building enterprise software for space that we're not building when we started.
Yeah.
Which is, it's great to see.
Yeah.
It means that the industry is growing and can support all of these companies as they come out of stealth mode or get founded, now that the industry is bigger and is growing.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the goals for Epsilon3 in the next year or so? What are you working towards next?
Yeah, I would love to see some collaborative work between a lot of our customers. We work closely with customers who sell to one another and or work together. And I'm starting to see a very good collaborative experience between a couple of our customers. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited to celebrate the successes of many of our customers who are getting to first missions or getting to first launches. And I just love celebrating what people are doing with our software. So It's really fun to see.
Great. Well, that leads me nicely to my next question about celebrating women in the industry. You've spoken quite a lot about wanting to, uplift kids in the industry, bringing more children into science and tech, women especially, encouraging them to follow their dreams. Why is that so important to you personally?
For me, I never had someone tell me you can't do that. And I would love to be a proponent of just supporting people's dreams, what people want to do. And for better or for worse, a lot of kids that I talk to look up to people like YouTube stars or influencers. And I would love to change the narrative on that and have people looking up to scientists or mathematicians or, somebody. No shade on people that look up to celebrities, but I think there are other really good role models out there, and we need to start with the parents, because it's the values of the parents become the values of the children. And so what do the parents talk about? What do they see in school? What do you see on billboards? Those are the things that our children are looking at, learning, and looking up to. And if we speak more about science, we speak more about biology or all of the medical advancements that are going on, how many people are living in space, how many satellites there are, people will get more excited about what potential there is out there. And I think that it starts with, how do we talk to our children? And then, it ends with, there's more diversity, both in culture, gender, age, etc., because the strongest teams that I've worked in have young people who have fresh ideas, people who are seasoned, and people from different cultures who bring different types of thinking. And so I like to see a lot of different types of people, not only in gender and race, but also in age. And we barely talk about that.
Yeah. 100%. Diversity is huge and it's really important, but particularly gender in the space industry is something that is obviously always been an issue. It's a traditionally male-dominated industry. It's been difficult for women to break through. I spoke to a previous guest and she's an investor, and she literally was saying that someone came up to her and said, "You don't look like an investor. What does an investor look like?" So it's all those kind of questions that, women have had to face. And, have you had any of those weird sort of odd experiences that have taken you back along the way?
Well, I don't look like an engineer, but I don't know what an engineer looks like. Exactly. So actually, sort of. So obviously, I worked at SpaceX for a really long time. I don't always wear, or I didn't always wear SpaceX t-shirts, but my husband really liked them. And they were comfortable, and he liked the shirts that I would bring home to him, and he would wear them all the time. And we would often go places, and this is one of his, he loves telling this story, because we would go places and people would come up to him and say, "Oh, how cool. Do you work at SpaceX?" And this was back when not everybody wore a SpaceX shirt.
Yeah.
And he would say, "No, my wife does."
Yeah.
She does, X, Y, and Z, things that we've already talked about. And they would look at me with a little bit of confusion and then say, "Wow, that's really cool." And so then I would have to explain. But he was very excited to tell people, like, "Oh, my wife works there. I don't work there."
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that story. Shut people down.
It's just a fun thing, because everyone always assumes, not everyone, but most people always assume that it's the man. And it's a very empowering thing to say, no, it's actually the woman who did that. But, I never really had a lot of setbacks. The hardest thing, I think, was when I was there, the workforce was very young. And I previously mentioned that I had my children while I was working there. Mm-hmm. That was probably the hardest thing that I had to go through, because at the time, nobody really understood what it was like to go on maternity leave, to have someone leave and come back. What do you do with their responsibilities? What job do they come back to? How do you support them when they are breastfeeding or, pumping or nursing? And I don't know if that's okay to talk about, but it has to be. Yeah. And those are the types of conversations that were really awkward when I was pregnant or, nursing postpartum. And one of the biggest changes that I think SpaceX made after that was they actually gave both parents 6 weeks of leave, which I think was really great, because people could spend time with their children. But I did not get that time with my first.
How long did you get?
Well, the state of California is really great and supports women and supports families. So I could have had 12 weeks total, but I took 6 weeks. And so I went back after my 6-week appointment, part-time.
Wow, that's incredible, firstly. And just comparing it to the UK, where you get a year, like 6 weeks, and then to be thrown back into such a high demanding job.
Yeah, it was not easy. And it was very tough, because then, even still, my kids were in daycare, and I mentioned that I would go home for dinner, but when daycare closes, you're getting charged for every minute of time that you're late. So I could not be late. Mm-hmm. And so at a job like that, and my husband would trade off who picks up. There are certain days when I don't have time to stay late. And it's hard to explain that when your whole life has been, I can stay whenever, I can work however long as possible. And that was a big shift.
Yeah. Do you think
just as a woman, I think is hard.
Of course. Do you think it's got better then? You mentioned in SpaceX things have changed, and now in your company, what do you try to advocate?
Well, I try to advocate for flexibility. I think the most important thing is getting the job done. So if you need to take time to take your kid somewhere, or your kid is sick and you need to take the day off, I want to support that. I want to be able to be a company where people feel comfortable saying, my child is sick, I'm going to stay home, I'll do X, Y, and Z today. But I think that the thing is, you have to have someone in leadership that either understands and knows someone closely that has gone through this, or have children yourself. I think parents make very dedicated employees, and I think they work really hard because they know what it takes to juggle everything, and it's really important to me to be able to support that.
Mm-hmm. And going back to my question about, uplifting women, what advice would you give to women wanting to do a similar thing that you've done? Want to go into the space industry, not really quite sure how to get into it, a little bit hesitant. What advice would you give to them?
I would say, don't let anyone tell you that you can't have it all. Because someone once told me, maybe you can't have it all. Maybe you should just stay home with your children. And I decided that was not my truth. I didn't want that to be me. I like working. I love my job. I love the people that I get to interact with on a daily basis. And I love my kids. And I can have them all. I have to just decide when and where each bucket lives. And if you basically craft out the life you want and you work really hard towards it, then you can have any number of things that you dream up for yourself. I think that's something important to remember.
That's really lovely. It's really nice. So when you're not in your Epsilon bucket, what do you like doing?
Me, I love physical activity. So every morning I go to the gym. It's like my me time. I run and go to the gym. And if I am not doing that on the weekend, I might be playing tennis, hiking, playing golf, doing something active with my kids, going to the beach, surfing, basically outdoor activities and reading.
Of course, you have the benefit of being on the beach, near the beach, which is amazing.
Yes. We also love to ski and basically all outdoor activities. And I do a lot of reading, both fiction and nonfiction. And after starting Epsilon3, I have found a new love for nonfiction.
Okay.
I did not go to business school, so I have had to learn a lot about building and running a business through reading and talking to people who have had similar experiences. And so the only way to learn is to do or have someone teach you. And there are so many books written about business that I have started to read, how to build teams, how to build culture, how to do any number of things in business. And I also really love fiction. So
do you have any recommendations?
Oh man. So all of these books are the business books. You see them. Recommendations on business books. Am I allowed to say bad words?
Maybe just avoid those.
There is one, but I will not say it. It's the No A rule.
Okay.
That one is pretty good. Yeah. I really like that book. And then for just how I try to run my life, I do really like Atomic Habits, because you want to craft your life, and the way you spend your time is how you define where your values lie. And Atomic Habits really helped me define what was important to me. So probably those are the ones that stick with me the most. There are a number of other ones, but I think those are pretty good. There's also one called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. That's really good. Okay. It's more of a story. That one is a good book as well.
Okay, great recommendations that I'll have to check out. Thank you. So just my final few questions now for you. looking forward to the next 5 years, what are your goals, both personally and for Epsilon3?
Oh, wow. That's a huge question. So for Epsilon3, I want to be a standard in the industry. I want people to know and want to use our product for all of their testing and operations, because I think we as an industry are lacking a good standard of how we document what we do and the decisions we make. For me personally, let's see, my kids are in 3rd and 4th grade. And so in 5 years, I will have one son going into high school. And so I would like to see my children flourish and be very independent, loving, kind humans.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura. I have one more question for you. And this is a question I ask all my guests. And it is, if you could put one message in a capsule for the next generation of women in space, what would it say?
Ooh, I know you told me to think about this, but I had so many different thoughts on what I would say. But I think the only thing I have is never give up. Is just keep pushing.
That's perfect. I think a lot of people, for some people, that simple message is all it is, isn't it? Some people don't even think they can do it. Or like you said, some people are told that they can't do it. Yeah. And if they don't give up, they have role models like you to look up to. So
yeah. Well, I think there are so many moments where you wonder, is this really worth it? And you have to ask yourself, if it's something that I really want, it is worth it. It's always worth it. And you have to choose whether you're going to stand up and push harder, or you're going to choose a different path. But if it's something that you really believe that you want, you should keep pushing until you achieve your goals.
100%. What a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for coming on our She Reaches podcast. It's been great having you.
All right. Thanks so much. Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you. That concludes today's episode of She Reaches Women Entrepreneurs in Space, featuring Laura Crabtree. This podcast is made possible by the support of SSPI professional, student, and corporate members. We're especially grateful for our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, producers of Via Satellite Magazine, Hughes, an EchoStar company, and the American Space Exploration Fund. Hughes Network Systems is a proud sponsor of the She Reaches Women in Space podcast, shining a spotlight on remarkable space entrepreneurs, engineers, and scientists. Hughes believes in empowering those who push the boundaries of innovation and shape the future of exploration. Join us in celebrating these trailblazers as they inspire us all to reach for the stars. Hughes Network Systems, supporting the dreamers who turn space into a universe of possibilities. For more information, visit www.hughes.com. To learn more about SSPI WISE and how you can get involved, visit wise.sspi.org. If you're not yet a member of SSPI, join our global community at www.sspi.org/how-join. Stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us on X at SSPI and at SSPI WISE, and you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. The SSPI podcast series, including the Better Satellite World podcast, the Making Leaders podcast, and SSPI WISE Presents, releases new episodes every Monday. Subscribe to the SSPI podcast at www.sspi.org/SSPI-podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again for another exciting conversation. Until next time, this is Tanveer Pujara signing off for She Reaches Women in Space.